your YouTube channel, JPR Litfest. To talk about the series and the wonderful authors we have lined up for JLF Brave New World, please welcome festival directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple.
Dear friends of literature, friends of JLF, we are delighted at the response from all of you to our first digital session some days ago. And we return again today with more programming which looks at the world around us, the brave new world we are trying to understand and to access. Do tune in, do link in, do engage, do comment as we celebrate books, dialogues, and literature.
Hello, my name is William Dalrymple. I'm one of the co-directors of the Jaipur Literature Festival, and I'm here to encourage you to turn on for Brave New World. This is the Jaipur in Exile online digital festival. We have an extraordinary array of writers. There are not many positive things coming out of this terrible pandemic, but one positive thing is that all the writers we've ever wanted at Jaipur, who for one reason or another weren't able to make it so far, have all said yes. And we have writers such as Robert McFarlane, Peter Carey, Alain de Botton, Emma Duval, writers we have longed to bring to you before, who've been too busy or unable to make the journey, who are now going to make it digitally online to a screen near you. So lock down, log in, and join us, please, for Brave New World.
Thank you, Namita. Thank you, William. Our opening session for today's Brave New World series is Footprints, Tracking the Plight of Migrant Workers. Even as photographs of the tens of thousands of migrant workers trying to make their way home amidst the ongoing lockdown, states have been struggling to find ways of helping, keeping in mind the need to contain the pandemic. Chinmay Tumbe and journalist author Saba Naqvi join us to track the plight of migrant communities and discuss the disruptions to labor markets and livelihoods. Chinmay Tumbe is passionate about migration, cities, and history, and is currently a faculty member at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He has been associated with leading educational institutions across 3 continents and served on migration policy groups. Welcome, Chinmay. Saba Naqvi is amongst India's best-known journalists, the former political editor of Outlook magazine. She now writes columns in leading Indian dailies, including The Times of India, The Tribune, and on several websites. She's also a well-known election analyst and political commentator. She's currently visiting professor at the Jindal School of Journalism. She has published 4 books, In Good Faith, Capital Conquest, Shades of Saffron, From Vajpayee to Modi, and her latest, The Coalition Handbook. She's currently working on her next book on India's backsliding democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, remember, please do ask questions and post comments, and we will have our speakers refer to this at the end of the session and hopefully be able to answer some of them. To continue to follow our handles, JLF Litfest, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get notified on our ongoing series. In case you get dropped off due to bandwidth issues, and we know that's really the problem right now, you can find us on YouTube channel JPR Litfest. Ladies and gentlemen, today's first session, Chinmay Tumbe and Saba Naqvi, Footprints, Tracking the Plight of Migrant Workers. Over to both of you, Saba and Chinmay.
Thank you so much, Sanjoy. Thank you, Namita. Thank you, William. Thank you, the entire Teamworks team, Anubhav, Kritika. Thank you for working on this and making it possible. First of all, Chinmay, Sanjoy has read out a very impressive sort of biodata of mine. But what I have recently witnessed in Delhi is beyond anything that my vast experience as a journalist that I have ever seen. So on the 28th, which is 4 days after the lockdown, because I have a journalist pass, so I somehow managed to get transport and I made my way to the eastern border of Delhi, which is over the Nizam Bridge, and where you go to Anand Vihar bus station. So when you, for those of us who know Delhi, it was the crowds started right from where I live, which is Mehrauli, near the Qutub Minar. So there were little groups of people just on the streets of Delhi, walking. As you crossed over and you reached towards the eastern border, so let's say they are starting off from the Gurgaon side, Haryana side of South Delhi, and they're headed towards Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, which are the two states where most of the migration into Delhi is from. The crowds become larger and larger as you approach the bridge, the Nizamuddin Bridge, and it becomes an exodus of humanity. It is the images that you saw, all of you would have seen on social media, cannot even begin to describe what was going on there. There was this exodus of there was this crowds coming in from all sides at Anand Vihar, desperate to go home. Now, but I'd pause here, Chinmay, before I get over to you. The thing that I noted on the first day of the journey, when I stopped and spoke to many of the migrating workers, the word migrants also, we want, they're citizens, right? We say migrants as if, we have to be careful about terminology when termites is used easily these days. So let's say the citizens of Delhi of India who found it necessary to get on their feet and start walking to villages hundreds of miles away. What I found in them, these were heroic people. They were people with a lot of dignity, with a lot of pride. These were the workers of India we were seeing out there. They were not people who were utterly destitute. Later, I went to a shelter home, and that is where the utterly destitute were, who would not even have the strength to begin this journey. Some of them, the women and children, it was mostly men, were dressed up in shiny new clothes with hair clips and all as if we are going home and our families and our villagers are going to see us. They were dressed up. They had bundles of food. They had plastic bottles of water. They had their belongings on backpacks. They were walking out of here with dignity and pride because they did not want to live off charity. So anyway, it was a moving sight. It was a terrifying sight. It had a strange beauty of the real people of India just quietly with determination, sometimes with a smile, just walking out of the city and saying, we are going to go home. The harvest is around the corner. We will get food to eat at home. So Chinmay, I've just said my opening piece. I'm going to turn it over to you and help us understand some facts and figures, but also what do you think will happen to most of the workers that we have seen trudge back to their villages?
Yeah. First of all, kudos to all the journalists who've been reporting relentlessly from the ground on the ongoing migration crisis. What you described, was a particular few days where the visuals were very strong, but it's an ongoing crisis. Even today, there are, as per the government's data, more than 20,000 migration camps. So this is, a tremendous event of migration. And for a person like me who's been studying migration now for more than 10 years, I think what's interesting is the sort of clear visibility that migrant workers have finally got by just being out there on the street. Because for the last 10 years, all of us who've been writing on migrant workers have always used the word invisible. Because a lot of people said they were surprised at the scale. It's not a surprise because, for those of us, again, who've been working on this, the numbers are there. More than 100 million circular migrant workers in India, forming literally a quarter of the workforce. These are numbers now from the Government of India's Economic Survey 2016-17, so it's not even an excuse that the government does not know about this. But what's really interesting is just, how many people came on the streets to go home. And Delhi, of course, was where I think the media attention was highlighted. But it was not only Delhi. It was all across India. Right now in Ahmedabad and in Gujarat, you had tremendous exodus from Ahmedabad, from Surat, not to far off destinations because you can't reach Bihar or UP very quickly relative to Delhi, but to Rajasthan, for example, to Madhya Pradesh. So all the neighboring sort of districts, mass exodus, and people were just walking from Gujarat to Rajasthan, Gujarat to Madhya Pradesh. People walking from Chennai to Andhra Pradesh, people walking from Bangalore to districts across state borders. So this is not a Delhi specific event. It's a mass sort of event, and of course millions literally have gone back, and millions are not millions, but as per the government numbers, about 600,000 people were stranded after the lockdown was sort of announced. This exodus started a few days before the lockdown, as it became imminent that a lockdown sort of event is going to happen. And from me, somebody who also studies migration from a historical perspective, it's interesting because of, these migrations are not new. They've been happening, for example, from Bihar and Eastern Uttar Pradesh. These migrations have had a long history. A lot of these migrant workers come from families who've been migrating for several generations now. And what the difference, of course, now is the sudden absence of transport. I mean, for example, the Indian Railways, which is the lifeline of all of us, but especially migrant workers in India. It's a symbol of hope more than anything else. For the Indian Railways not to work, and this is probably the first time the Indian Railways has been shut down in its 150-year history en masse, for buses not to work, for a variety of transport options not to work, was something completely out of the blue. And that's one of the reasons why people started walking. Today, there's an article of a person who reached Odisha from Maharashtra on cycle. This person cycled 1,700 kilometers. Right? So two things out here. One is, why are people trying to get back home? That's a lot of people are trying to understand this from the point of view that if there was a lockdown announced, and if all of us are staying home, then why are these people going back? Why can't they stay home? And the first thing to understand is that most people actually don't see the places they are staying as home. Home for them is the native place. So when you see actually stay home, that's exactly what they did. They started walking and saying, yes, we're going to go home because that's what you're telling us to do. And why is this migration so circular? A lot of reasons, but something's coming from the source region. For example, gender norms. You'll see that a lot of this was male migration. So of course, a lot of women and children were also in the streets. But in particular, we just not had decent housing options. We're saying more than about 70% of urban jobs in India in the informal sector. So the whole precarious nature of work, which means that if there's a lockdown announced, it's obvious that people are going to lose jobs, people are going to lose money. Given that there were no assurances in the lockdown speech, the assurances came about 4 days late. It was not just panic, but it was the most rational thing to do. That is, the government is saying stay home, and so I'm going to walk home. And the government is not really giving me an assurance on my wage for tomorrow. In which case, it makes sense for me to go. And that's the way I've sort of seen this exodus as a very, very rational perspective. Because a lot of people are saying that it was only in Delhi, which is completely false. It was a pan-Indian sort of media attention. And Delhi is a unique city-state. So, because people knew that the state borders were going to get sealed, they started moving for the state borders very quickly. Whereas, for example, from Mumbai, district migrations happened. People went from Mumbai to Ratnagiri and so on. But they had to wait. Now, there are a lot of people waiting in Mumbai to go to UP. So, A, it is pan-Indian. And B, it's a very, very rational thing to do. And now I think there's a huge concern that the whole idea of, locking down migrant workers so that they don't take back the disease back home, which at one from a sort of epidemiological perspective seems very fair, very, good, given that rural health infrastructure is not that great, I think has kind of misfired, because now after 21 days, we really don't know what to do with these stranded migrants. Most to actually from then, when the virus transmission rates were literally negligible at that point. Whereas now we know that the virus transmission rates are higher. And so now there is a real concern that, what happens if these migrant workers go. So I think overall, not taking into account, this whole so-called invisible workforce, which for the first time became visible, has kind of misfired quite spectacularly. And of course, now the government has to be providing shelter, food for them. But we are seeing incidents in Gujarat, in Surat, for example, a lot of unrest. And now if there's a lockdown extension as it's imminent, I think this sort of real painful crisis is going to continue.
I want to get back to the Surat thing a little later, Chinmay. There's just one story I want to share with you, and you've probably heard it. First of all, I got the impression that the address to the nation, which announced a lockdown, I think that there must have been misinformation, because how do you speak to people about balconies and homes when we know what cities are like? So either our leadership, our political leadership, because this is not the time even for name calling. I'm not even in that mood right now. I got the feeling that the entire panic, lockdown, fear, everything is directed at making people like me feel safe. Me, you, Sanjoy, all of us. I just want to get that now. So I want to just tell you a conversation that I had with a man, with a gentleman whom I met on the bridge, and I walked with him towards Anand Vihar that day. So he was headed, and I spoke to him today before this program. I've spoken to him before because I was writing columns and all. I've kept in touch with his journey, and he's a worker. He's been in Delhi for 15 years. He's from Siddharth Nagar district, which is next to Gorakhpur, near the border with Nepal. So where he worked in Gurgaon, the 2000 worker factory shut down. I have the name, I don't want to go here. 2000 worker factory shut down without wages on the 20th. They'd worked for 20 days, they shut down. And they were, the landlord where they stayed, three men to a room, told them they have to pay the rent in advance or they're out. So they had no choice but to go home. He was a very dignified man, and he was refusing charity towards Anand Vihar, and he was a lovely, lovely, intelligent man. So anyway, so I went up with him to Anand Vihar. Then I went away. I'm a journalist. I left. And later on, he would tell me his journey. So they stayed there till nightfall. They got into one bus. It was so crowded, the police made them get off. Then they were sent to another bus stand, I think a place called Lal Kuan or some other bus stand he was told to go to, where again they was packed in like sardines. Anyway, he reached somewhere, they moved, the bus moved, and they got in a few hundred miles into Uttar Pradesh. They got off, where the police packed them like animals in a truck, which was carrying gas cylinders. Man to man, they stood crushed. At some point, they got off again. Somehow or the other, he reached the city of Lucknow, like this off, on, where people started to look at them suspiciously. People he knew were not willing to take the migrating individuals in. He got another local transport bus halfway, then another bus. He reached his village. He was asked to stay separately. Okay. Now, today when I spoke to him, he is now back with his family. He's sounding cheerful. He is a Yadav. He is saying that I will do dhan katai. The wheat harvest is round the corner, and he will do all this. But he turned around and he said to me, I'll speak in Hindi here. मैडम आपको नहीं लगता कि हम लोग के साथ क्यों किया, आप लोग को अलग रखना चाहिए था ना, क्योंकि आप लोग विदेश से आते हैं. तो मैंने कहा रामजीत ये बताइए, आपके जो 2000 वर्कर थे, आप कुछ खबर रख रहे हैं किसके साथ क्या हुआ? इसे सब ठीक है, कोई किसी को कोरोना वायरस तो हुआ नहीं है, लेकिन हम ये पूछना चाह रहे हैं कि आप लोग को क्यों आप लोग की वजह से क्यों निकाला? So, I just wanted to share this conversation today.
No, absolutely. And it is being dubbed now as the Amari Bimari. I mean, this is the word used in the sort of migrant worker language that is, this is the disease of the rich.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to, what do you think is, I would really like to know, Chinmay, are we going to see, so he's going to survive it, clearly. There's enough land for him not to starve. But he said, jiske paas zameen nahi hai. What will happen to the landless workers? Are we going to see mass hunger, famine and starvation in certain parts of India? May I ask you, we've seen some astonishing models for corona, which go up and down and up and down. Which is actually, it's like, some of it is ridiculous, Yeah. Please tell me, do we have models? Because we are a country which has dealt with hunger and famine.
Yeah. Let me put this in a particular way. So if we look at, the lockdown effect, one huge effect, of course, is on health levels, right? And so already people are cutting back on consumption. Already, India's health statistics are not the best. High levels of malnutrition. It will help, especially pregnant mothers right now. So there's a clear knock-on effect of just, even if not stark, mortality, stuff like morbidity, stuff like malnutrition. That's already beginning to, it's mass famine. My sense is not, for the simple reason that we had a lot of rainfall last year. There, bumper stocks at the Food Corporation of India. So as of now, we see, and that is one of the logics for the extension of the lockdown, saying we are reasonably comfortable in terms of basic supplies. But the way the economy works is through very complex web of supply chains. So, for example, you say that you have rice, 80 million tons or whatever the number is. That's a safe number. But then for rice to reach a particular place, you need trucks, you need truck drivers. Now, if the truck drivers are migrants who have gone back home and they're not going to come back immediately, that connecting link is sort of broken. The railways is not there. So these are the automatic sort of effects which come in, and it's going to start reflecting in prices. And already you're seeing agricultural prices spike up. You're going to see more. So on one side, demand has contracted, which means prices are falling. So in real estate, for example, is completely dead. So prices are actually expected to fall. But in consumer products, not consumer, but in especially food staple products, you're likely to see actually prices go up. I should also mention that historically, the worst year on record in Indian history in terms of an economic performance was the influenza pandemic of 1918-19, where India's economy tanked by about 10 percentage points. Inflation. This was in 1980, and for the same reason, of course, that was that was a horrendous pandemic. It wiped out 15 million Indians. Numbers you can't even imagine. 6% of India's population was wiped out. And at that point, what happened was precisely because nobody was going to work, nothing was produced. So the effect was not felt immediately, but in a few months later, the supply chain started to contract and prices started to go up. So you have the unique case where nothing is being produced and prices just start galloping up. So hopefully, our economics team at the finance ministry is keeping a very close tab on supplies, keeping a very close tab on prices, because once prices start going up, that's when again it starts pinching the poorest of the poor, because they're sort of outpriced in the market. So that's one lesson one has to learn from the last pandemic, in which India suffered tremendously. I mean, that was India's worst demographic disaster till date. But I don't think in the immediate run they're going to see mass starvation. Of course, there's starvation happening at individual sort of household level, and we've seen, as as journalists like you have documented horrendous stories of migrant workers exodus. But I don't think it's that calamitous as yet, and hopefully the government is keeping a very close. I think what's heartening now, after well into the lockdown, is to see the response of chief ministers. Across states, they've been very responsive, and chief ministers, whether it's in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, in Maharashtra, variety of say Rajasthan, they literally have a good communication system on a daily basis, assuring people that their supplies and so on. So right now, of course, we all buy in that there are supplies. But I think in a few months, if this lockdown is not phased out gradually and the economy is not brought back into focus, we're going to actually, people are going to start questioning these supplies. And this is exactly what happened in Surat, when the migrant workers say, we're getting rations. That's what's assured. But the rations were assured till April 14th, because that was when the lockdown was supposed to end. And now you're saying that the lockdown is going to get extended. So this sort of uncertainty is again, playing into people's head, and it's laying the seeds for a lot of unrest. So hopefully this lockdown is not extended indefinitely. There should be a clear, guideline as to when it is going to be phased out, so that people have a clear idea of how to plan.
So, just I want to ask you this question. In fact, strangely, because I've been working in UP, and in the ones that I've seen, they have got food from the state government. They found en route. So we are talking about various state government. They found that food kitchens and all were there for them as they traveled in. But I'm just wondering that, do you think that given the fact that we had projections for the coronavirus in India, supposing you had a right to make a decision and you are aware of the life of India's working population, would you have had a lockdown? I mean, I believe the lockdown is going to kill more people than coronavirus would. It's just that the coronavirus would have killed more people like me.
Yeah.
And
But no, I'm completely sympathetic to your concerns. But when you look at it in terms of the sheer numbers of deaths, it's very surprising. But just the fact that you have a lockdown means that there are simply cars on roads, and there's no movement. And believe it or not, 1,000 people in India die on a daily basis in usual times simply because of accidents like this. So which means that in a 21-day lockdown, already 21,000 lives have been saved or postponed to certain extent. So lockdown has very interesting impacts on mortality. What you're saying is the starvation, the economic impact, which is also very, very tough. The way I see it, it's so the question was, would if I was the Prime Minister of India, would I have enforced a lockdown? I think the lockdown was a good decision, but the way it had zero planning. And if you saw what happened with international travel, it was very phased. Over a 1 month, certain countries were first quarantined. After that, more countries were quarantined. Messages given saying, international travel is going to be, it's going to stop at a certain point. Clear guidelines even for internal flights. They said first March 24th, then March 30th that domestic flights will be stopped. So there was a clear process in place from the end of February to the middle of March with respect to international travel. But this national lockdown, which I think was a good idea, but completely unplanned or unprepared for, especially in terms of this potentially large number, 100 million circular migrant workers that we're talking. And in my opinion, I think this idea of containing migrant workers so that the virus is not spread was misplaced. And it's beginning to show up now because, as I said, we have now the stranded migrants who are desperate to go back home. And we are telling them that, we can't allow you to go back home now because the virus transmission rates are slightly high. So in my opinion, I think the lockdown was important, but not the way. They should have kept some basic railway services open. I think closing down the railways in the way they did was really sent the shockwave. The Indian Railways is not just a means of transport. It is much more than that. It is really a symbol of hope. That's how I see the railways. So the railways, for example, should not have been shut down the way it was. But overall, I think the lockdown, if you see in terms of the spread of the virus, obviously the fact that nobody is traveling, it does mean that the numbers are not as high. Of course, you can argue that not enough testing has taken place and so on. But compared to many other countries, we seem to be doing slightly better. Should the lockdown be extended? In my phase, I think it should just be phased out very, very gradually. But they should start now because, as you said, I think in the last 2 weeks, we've not seen the sort of the fact that more people have died through the virus, or more people have died because of the economic lockdown. I think that's about fair and square. But I think from now on, every additional day of the lockdown, of the economic lockdown, will actually, this is a very hard trade-off that the government has to make, will actually play on the lives of millions of people. And so I think now this 21-day lockdown was okay. It's done. It's useful. But now I think there should be a gradual phased exit. And again, this idea that migrant workers will take the virus back home, I think you have to give some credit to migrant workers, saying that they will practice these social distancing norms, quarantining norms, because that messaging has taken place quite effectively. And so this kind of fear that they're going to take it back home is unwarranted, because if you're going to have 600,000 people in these 20,000 odd camps, in fairly congested camps, we've created a new crisis. We've created new congestion zones, and where this virus could potentially spread. So that's my broad reasoning that the lockdown was important, but much better planning. And as the exit has to happen fairly quickly, otherwise you're going to have a major economic meltdown very soon.
I feel that the lockdown, we are going to get to questions very quickly. I actually disagree with you here. I thought it was cruel. I think it was completely cruel that you do this to people who will have no choice but to walk home. And while we were considerate towards the international travelers and our middle classes and this whole vocabulary of talking to all of us.
I completely agree with you. I mean, the transport options, being taken away. I completely agree with you on that. Yeah.
So I found it a thing. So it's actually, it's not one regime. It's the whole ruling class.
Sure.
Always sort of, we disregard people. It's just built into the way we do things here.
And the difference shown to international travelers versus domestic travelers. I think that was very stark.
5-star hotels. They were taken in 5-star hotels, and people, the workers of India. And this is not. I'm not directing one particular government. This attitude has been there all the way through.
Sure.
Just the fact that tomorrow, if there is a health crisis in our countryside, there is no public health.
Yeah.
There is no public health system. built in this sort of democracy that we celebrate. Anyway, to go there, I think we are reaching the time where we're getting questions. So we have one from Devjani Mukherjee. She says Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee has suggested in an interview that migrants should be accommodated in hotels. What is your view of that? I mean, please, tell me.
I mean, if space is a constraint, I mean, I think all the spaces have to be opened up. So there's no question about that. I think right now what is being used are public spaces, schools, government schools, and so on. But if hotels have to be opened up, why not? And if I'm not mistaken, the Taj has actually in Bombay opened up for doctors. They made the concession for doctors. But in principle, yes, if there's a real constraint, hotel, whatever space that you can get should be used.
Subir is asking, which I'm going to answer. I'm just sharing it with you. He asked, did the Indian government anticipate the current migrant labor exodus, or was it? One second. Did the Indian government anticipate the current migrant labor exodus, or was it a surprise? What could the administration have done to prevent this occurrence? So here's what I think happened. Because
you should tell.
Any regime willfully trust its people in this kind of cruel situation that we witnessed all over India. I don't believe that anyone would willfully do it. I think that the lack of consultation with states was the big mistake made in the beginning. And just to tell you what happened in Delhi, for instance, as the workers started to march out, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, rightly so, said that he would be in the borders to make arrangements for them. They're also, I mean, there are citizens who originally come from villages in the state. So they felt that they would go there and the government would have buses for them. So I think the decision that was announced suddenly, at that time a mistake was made by not coordinating with the state government.
Absolutely.
That is the reason, Subir, for this chaos that we witnessed. The whole thing could have been done, because in the end it is the state governments which are sort of handling what has happened, because so that is the answer to that.
Absolutely. I'll also just add that this idea that the government could not have anticipated. I mean, these are numbers on migrants coming out from the government. I mean, the government knows. There was a committee on migration which published a report in 2017. This particular group, connected with 8 different ministries. There's a policy called the One Nation, One Ration, portability for social security, which has been on the cards. So this idea that people don't know that migrant workers exist seems to be, surprisingly flawed. I think I don't know. I think they must just not have been good advice given to the Prime Minister on this particular issue.
Absolutely, we agree on this. That there was a big error made over there, a big error in the management of which it came out. Chinmay, there's a question I'd like you to answer, because I don't have an answer to this, and it's a very important question from Mr. Chandar Gupta. He says, will migrant workers return to work immediately after the lockdown is lifted?
Yeah, simple answer. You have to understand the migration calendar. Most migrants actually come back usually in middle of May, June, and July, and stay. So if you look at the classic circular migrant worker, they are outside for about 9 to 10 months, and they're back home typically from the middle of May to about end of July, August, and so on. Now, what's going to happen now is that some of them have gone back, some of them are desperate to go back. And what you're going to see in the immediate short term is a lot of people who will go back and who will stay out for a long period, and then of course come back eventually, as usual in September and October. But what's going to happen is there's the month of May, when usually migrants are out in the cities. This year, they're all going to desperately try and go back. So you're going to see massive labor shortages in major sectors, in manufacturing sectors, in cities in the month of May for sure. And that is going to drive up, labor costs and so on. So short answer, will the migrants come back? Yes, they will, but it will take some time. Again, there have been epidemics in the past. There have been industry shutdowns. For example, Surat has shut down many times because of recession and so on. Migrants have gone back, but things have started getting slightly better. They also come, because ultimately, you do get much higher wages in the city. So the city is seen as a place of economic security, but the village is a place for social security. That's the way I see it. And so when there's no economic security, you run to the village, and the minute the economic security or signs of it are there, you go back. I'll also add that for those migrants who actually choose not to go back, that's a very interesting time, because now there's going to be a shortage of labor. So actually your bargaining power goes up tremendously. So for the few migrant workers who are in the city, they are actually going to get huge concessions, because firms are just going to try and get whoever they can to work. And we've seen this 100 years back during the plague of Bombay in 1898, where about half of Bombay emptied out. And worker rights and a lot of the stuff that we talk about, the roots of trade union movement of Bombay started after the plague because of this massive worker shortage. And so I won't be surprised if you see very interesting concessions given to workers who have chosen to stay in the cities in the month of May.
Yeah, we're getting a slight. This I don't have rhetorical question, but I'll try and get into it. The central government managed to plan the Kashmir lockdown extremely well. They also planned Trump's visit. But why did they not plan this? Anyway, I mean, do we have an answer for a question like this?
Not really, but I just say that the Kashmir lockdown is very different from current lockdown for the simple reason that you don't have internet. Imagine a lockdown without internet. I think all of us are surviving thanks to internet, including migrant workers. They're watching entertainment shows on their phones and so on. So let's not compare this with the Kashmir lockdown, because that case, there was absolutely no internet.
I agree. I entirely agree with you about that. And there's one more, which I don't know this. Is there enough PDS rice to help the migrants? From Madhur asked this question. Is there a rice? I mean,
yeah, I think that's the reasoning. We've had bumper stocks and last year, and so at least in terms of rice and wheat, India's a comfort level. But of course, we can't eat only rice and wheat. I mean, you need something with the rice and wheat, and so that's why there has to be close monitoring of the entire the entire food supply chain. And so of course, we are seeing some in Ahmedabad where I live. I think the mandis are going to shut down tomorrow and so on. So that's going to start biting. It's not enough to say that okay, rice is available, but what about other commodities? So very, very close attention to supply chains.
So before I ask you the question that I have, actually, I've been wanting to ask you this, because I don't know if we can generalize in this vast population of workers who have traveled all over India, these hard-working, steady people. Chinmay, do we have a profile? I mean, in my view, the impression that I got from the people that I spoke to is that they were proud, skilled workers. They earned about 15 to 18,000 in the city. Yeah. They sent it back. They lived here. They shared rooms with other workers in their small industry or factory. That is the rough calculation that I came up with by talking to people that day. So they were all here. It was to better their life and to send money. So these people that we heard vocabulary, that they do not know what they are doing and why they're on the streets. What I wanted to say to some of the commentators was, these are people who support families. They are heroes when they go back to their villages.
Yeah.
So, I mean, can you just give me a profile of the average?
Sure. Yeah. So, when we say about 1 in 10 households in India has a person outside for work. Yeah. And the kind of person you're talking about is pretty much the dominant, what we call a semi-permanent migrant. So these are guys who are, spending their lifetimes outside their villages, but they don't settle in the city. They eventually, they're saving so that they can build a nice house back home and eventually retire that. And these numbers are, say, more than 50 million such workers. For example, a huge range of informal sector jobs, cooks, plumbers, security guards, for example, and so on. But then you also have the construction worker, who has a very different profile. So in this profile that you're talking about, they have some land back home. There's overrepresentation among the upper caste, for example. But in the construction worker, brick-kiln worker, farm harvesting, which is a number about 20 to 30 million people, what we call as seasonal short-term migrants, they can't live in the city actually for too long because they don't have enough money. So in order to be able to live in the city, you need to have some starting capital. So in this other stream of what we call as really short-term migration, that is overrepresented, by the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and that is concentrated in certain pockets of India, like this border between Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, or Western Odisha. So different geographies of the semi-permanent security guard or the cook and this construction and Britain, but they're all there. We see them actually on a daily basis. But we have to understand that they're quite different. One is earning 5,000, one is earning 15,000, and there's a huge difference between that. But most of them will spend a huge part of their life outside their villages and then eventually go back home. And that construction worker, it's quite likely can, over time, or the family can become, eventually a plumber or a cook. I mean, that's the story of many of these migration. Look at Kerala. I mean, Kerala, the first migrants who went to the Gulf, they were all labor migrants mostly. Today, that number has, in the kind of what we call as, say, professional class migration to the Gulf has increased from something like 10% about 2 decades back to almost 40%. So the migration from Kerala to the Gulf has completely transformed because the same guys, their kids have kind of come up and they are doing very different kinds of jobs. And so in Kerala, actually today, the Keralites don't want to do all the low-end jobs. And so who's doing that? They've got mass migration from North India. So 2 million North Indians who are working in Kerala right now. So very interesting migration dynamics in India.
In Kerala, yes, there's been a question about the Kerala model, but I won't go there now because we have to end quickly. I want to ask you something that concerns me. Where are the most vulnerable migrants from? Would you say they are from areas that I am from, Eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar?
Bihar, definitely, because Bihar's overall, level of sort of infrastructure and so on is not great. Education, so average, let's call it human capital of the migrant workers is lesser. So even in the semi-permanent or short term, it's quite different. But I would say that the most marginalized are typically in central India. So we're talking about places like Chhattisgarh, Western Odisha, Western Madhya Pradesh. A lot of tribal hamlets, not necessarily, but a lot of them. These are the hotspots where the migrations over time, very little upward mobility. Whereas you talk of Eastern UP, for example, you're right that a lot of people get stuck in poverty for long periods of time. But the empirical evidence is very clear. Households without migrants do much better than households without out-migrants. And over time, there's some amount of upward mobility. I mean, Eastern UP is doing much better than Bundelkhand, for example, and that region, precisely because of this migration remittance. Also note that in different parts of India have a climatic constraint. So in Eastern UP, we're talking of floods. So you'll find a lot of people who own land and are in the city, and they say, what's the use of having land because our fields are flooded all the time. In coastal Orissa, cyclones. So there are a lot of these climatic events which lead to a lot of uncertainty. And so for them, actually, the city is actually a much more secure thing because once in a few years, there's a sort of natural disaster which affects you back.
Right. Okay. So what is the solution now? We've come to the end of the program. What should we be doing now?
Yeah, I think
what would you advocate, and how should we look at this problem?
I think what this migrant exodus tells us is that for the first time, it's really made this very visible that there are actually so many workers in our cities that the minute there's no economic security, they go out. And I think a lot of people are coming around to the fact that really, they live in terrible housing conditions. There are no real social security contracts and so on. So I think there has to be a massive movement for social security for everyone, actually. But the levels, whether it's pensions, whether it's PPFs, whether it's formal contracts, I think all those things have to be laid out. For migrant workers in particular, this idea of portability of social security. One of the reasons why there's this instant flight behavior is because you can get ration, rice, back home. You can use the PDS back home, but you can't use the PDS if you're from Bihar and in Delhi, right? And so what this One Nation, One Ration Card scheme aims to do, if it is launched this year at all, it should be launched, is that you can basically access social security anywhere in India. Which means if you're from Bihar and are working in Kerala, you should be able to access social. And this would require, as you said, interstate coordination. So what we need, so right now, for example, I know for a fact, the Uttar Pradesh government wants to know how many migrants from Uttar Pradesh and Gujarat. There's simply no way of knowing that. Because the census of 2011 data is still not out fully, after 9 years after the data was collected. So we need better, information on how migrants are moving around India. We need portable social security, which means they can access social security anywhere. And in general, I think, because what's interesting is this is an event about an epidemic. It is about transmission. It is about contagion. And what we don't realize is that migrants stay in very congested, high-density sites on average, picking up all sorts of infections, communicable diseases all the time, right? And so that's a public health issue, which I believe deserves as much attention as this pandemic once it has sort of gone away. For example, tuberculosis is a huge issue in India. A lot of other diseases which happen precisely because of horrendous sites that a lot of these migrant workers are living in. And so from a public health perspective, I think it's very important to put the public health of migrant workers very high up on the radar during so-called normal times, because when you look at actually the death rates, they are much higher than these COVID death rates that you're seeing today. I mean, about 1,000 people die of TB every day in India. So these issues need to come in the forefront much more.
So, Chinmay, it's been such a delight, but I just want to add here to my own thing. So, I spoke to my friend in Champaran, Bihar, from where a lot of migrants have reached back. And I will tell you one thing, that there is no public health in Bihar. And so you have these camps where the chief minister and the administration of Bihar says that people are kept in quarantine. They go away and they come back, and the chief minister knows there's nothing he can do about it. There is no public health in Bihar. So, I can't even blame him. So what I'm saying is, what really disturbs me about what's been happening here is that we speak a language about section, because our society lives through so many centuries and in so many economic zones, that we speak a language which only applies to one part of India. And because so I completely get it. In Bihar, there is no public health. So what are we talking about here? People will pick up their dead. There's been this disturbing visual of a mother walking with a dead child. Even your transport has stopped. So if somebody dies, anything else, there's actually no hope, because the private sector catered for most of our health needs. So I am very, very angry with many, many things. But I think this is our opportunity to hope that workers, environment, climate, all these things also get discussed.
Absolutely. I mean, this thing which is going on, which I completely agree with, the amount spent on defense expenditure around the world, and the fact that countries like US don't have enough ventilators. Even countries like US, I mean, there's Bihar and there's US, and both are turning out to be very similar on very, very basic health requirements. And so hopefully, I think there's a danger that if this thing is because India seems to respond only to a crisis. That if this thing goes away in 2 months, that it'll be back to normal. But I think what both of us agree on is that even normal for many of these migrant workers is not. I mean, one has to do much more. And hopefully that, I think the operative word is empathy. That is, hopefully these disturbing visuals raise some empathy for people who live in cities, saying that these people also exist, and they are also Indians, and they require as equal a treatment as anybody else.
Such a pleasure conversation. Sanjoy, over to you. Thank you, Chinmay. Such a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Saba.
Thank you so much, Chinmay. Your book, India Migration, History of Migration, is very important and a must-read at this point. Fascinating to see the comparison between USA and America and Bihar. I wonder what Trump would have to say on that. But absolutely vital, and really look at the health issue with workers in very congested places, what you brought up, when this particular pandemic is behind us. Thank you, Saba. Look forward to reading about the workers who found their way home and their stories. And as far as the anger goes, well, this is Easter, so it's time to forgive. And as Chinmay said, it's time for empathy, it's time for love, it's time for compassion. And perhaps if you're able to ensure that all of this, and we're looking, as you said, to all of India, not just our segment or one or the other segment, but really to those Indias that we tend sometimes to forget about, I think perhaps we'll find better solutions. But truly, it was a fascinating conversation, very, very important. I hope people will be able to share it, and when you log off, both of you will also share it, and it'll be there to stay on YouTube. For those of you who've sent in their questions and have logged on, thank you so much. Remember, we'll be back at 9 o'clock with The Boundary, Jhumpa Lahiri in conversation with Chiki Sarkar. Penguin author Jhumpa Lahiri, winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, talks polylingual literature in a time of pandemics alongside Chiki Sarkar from The Juggernaut. For those of you who perhaps would like to stay on, we leave you with a short extract from our Jaipur Literature Festival Morning Music Archives, Gunijan Sabha Morning Ragas by Padmini Rao. Padmini Rao is part of the Ustad Imamuddin Khan Dagar Indian Music, Art and Culture Society and the Dagar Archive, Jaipur. She is an accomplished exponent of the Kirana Gharana form of North Indian classical music. She is one of the senior most disciples of Padma Bhushan Dr. Prabha and trained in sitar from Pramila Dagar. Discovering that her first love was for vocal music, she was also under the guidance of the late Ustad Zia Moinuddin Khan Dagar, the renowned scholar Drupad and Rudra and Veena Maestro. So remember, stay on if you'd like to. If not, come back. Join us at 9 o'clock for our next session. Stay safe and
thank you so much.
Shivaya. Before I conclude with a Meera composition in Rag Khamaj, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to the Ustad Imamuddin Khan Dagar Indian Music Art